The funeral hall was cold, silent, and heavy with grief. Ethan, a 12-year-old boy with messy brown hair and red, swollen eyes, sat on the floor beside his mother's coffin. His small hands gripped the edge of the wooden box, his knuckles white. He hadn't moved for hours. Not when the priest finished the prayers, not when the last of the mourners left, and not even when the funeral staff gently urged him to let go. "Ethan, it's time," one of the staff members whispered, placing a hand on his shoulder. But Ethan didn't respond. His mother was all he had. His father had died when he was just 3 years old, and Ethan barely remembered him. But his mother, her laughter, her warmth, her stories, was everything. And now she was gone, just like that. No warning, no goodbye, just a sudden, crushing silence. The staff exchanged uneasy glances. They had never seen a child so attached to a coffin. But Ethan wasn't just attached. He was frozen. His mind replayed the last moments he had with his mother. She had been fine that morning, making his favorite pancakes, humming a tune. By evening, she was gone. A heart attack, the doctor said. Ethan didn't understand how a heart could just stop. How could hers stop when it was the only thing keeping him alive? As the hours dragged on, the hall grew darker. The staff finally gave up, leaving Ethan alone with his mother's coffin. The silence was deafening, but Ethan didn't care. He couldn't leave her. Not yet. Not ever. But then something strange happened. A faint sound broke the silence. At first, Ethan thought it was his imagination, but it grew louder, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from inside the coffin. His heart raced. Was it his mother? Was she still alive? He leaned closer, his ear pressed against the cold wood. The tapping stopped. Ethan held his breath, waiting. Then it came again, louder this time, more urgent. "Mom?" Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. He stood up, his hands shaking as he pushed against the coffin lid. It didn't budge. The tapping grew frantic, almost desperate. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had to open it. He had to see her. With all his strength, he pushed the lid again. This time it shifted slightly. The tapping stopped. Ethan froze. What if it wasn't his mother? What if it was something else? Something worse? Before he could decide what to do, the lights in the hall flickered. Shadows danced on the walls and the air grew colder. Ethan's breath came out in visible puffs. He looked around, his fear mounting. The tapping started again, but this time it wasn't coming from the coffin. It was coming from the walls, from everywhere. Ethan backed away, his eyes wide with terror. The coffin lid creaked open on its own, and a cold, unnatural wind swept through the hall. Ethan's legs gave out, and he collapsed to the floor, his eyes fixed on the coffin. And then he saw it. A hand, pale and lifeless, emerged from the coffin, gripping the edge. Ethan wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The hand was followed by an arm, then a shoulder, and finally a face. But it wasn't his mother's face. It was something else, something twisted and wrong. Ethan's world went black. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was no longer in the funeral hall. He was lying on a soft bed in a dimly lit room. The walls were painted a warm beige, and a faint scent of lavender filled the air. For a moment, he thought it had all been a nightmare. The coffin, the tapping, the hand. But the heaviness in his chest told him otherwise. "You're awake," a gentle voice said. Ethan turned his head and saw a woman sitting in a chair beside the bed. She had kind eyes and a soft smile, but there was a sadness in her expression that mirrored his own. Her hair was a shade lighter than his mother's, and she wore a simple dress that reminded him of the ones his mother used to wear. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his voice hoarse. "I'm Amelia," the woman said. "Your mother's sister. I've come from Australia to take care of you." Ethan blinked, trying to process her words. He had heard his mother mention an aunt who lived far away, but he had never met her. He didn't even know her name until now. "Where am I?" he asked. "You're at my house," Amelia replied. "The funeral home called me when they found you unconscious. I came as soon as I could." Ethan's heart sank as the memories flooded back. The coffin, the tapping, the hand. He shuddered, pulling the blanket tighter around himself. "I saw something," he whispered, At the funeral home, it wasn't, it wasn't my mom. Emilia's expression softened. She reached out and placed a hand on his. You've been through a lot, Ethan. It's normal to have nightmares after something like this. It wasn't a nightmare, Ethan insisted. It was real. I saw it. Emilia hesitated, her gaze flickering with something Ethan couldn't quite place. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we're grieving. It's okay to be scared. Ethan wanted to argue, but he was too exhausted. He sank back into the pillows, his eyes drifting shut. Emilia stayed by his side, her presence a small comfort in the storm of his emotions. Over the next few days, Ethan barely spoke. He spent most of his time in his room, staring at the walls or flipping through old photo albums of his mother. Emilia tried to coax him out with offers of food or walks in the garden, but he refused. He couldn't bring himself to face the world without his mother. But Emilia was patient. She didn't push him or force him to talk. Instead, she left little things for him, a plate of cookies on his bedside table, a book she thought he might like, a note telling him she was there if he needed her. Slowly, Ethan began to notice her efforts. He started to see the similarities between her and his mother. The way she hummed while cooking, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan finally ventured out of his room. He found Emilia in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up when he entered, her face lighting up with surprise. Ethan, she said, setting down the knife, I'm glad you're here. I was just about to make some soup. Would you like to help? Ethan hesitated, then nodded. He pulled up a chair and sat at the counter, watching as Emilia worked. She handed him a carrot and a peeler, showing him how to remove the skin in long, even strips. As they worked side by side, Ethan felt a small flicker of warmth in his chest. It wasn't the same as being with his mother, but it was something. Your mom used to love cooking, Emilia said, breaking the silence. She always said it was her way of showing love. Ethan looked up, surprised. You knew her? Emilia smiled. Of course. We were sisters. We grew up together, shared secrets, fought over silly things. She was my best friend. Ethan's throat tightened. I miss her. I know, Emilia said softly. I miss her too. But she's still with us in a way, in our memories, in the things she taught us, in the love she gave us. Ethan didn't respond, but for the first time since his mother's death, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to live without her. But as the days passed, strange things began to happen. Ethan would hear whispers in the hallway when no one was there. Shadows would move in the corners of his vision. And sometimes, late at night, he would hear the faint sound of tapping, just like he had at the funeral home. He tried to ignore it, telling himself it was just his imagination. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. And when he finally worked up the courage to tell Emilia, her reaction was not what he expected. I've been hearing it too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to scare you, but I think your mother is trying to tell us something. Ethan's heart raced. What do you mean? Emilia hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She handed it to Ethan, her hands trembling. I found this in your mother's thing, she said. I think it's for you. Ethan unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the words written in his mother's familiar handwriting. As he read, his blood ran cold. Ethan, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. There are things you need to know, things I should have told you a long time ago. Be careful, my love. Not everything is as it seems. Ethan stared at the letter, his hands trembling. The words seemed to blur as his eyes filled with tears. His mother's handwriting was unmistakable. The looping letters, the slight slant to the right. But the message was cryptic, unsettling. What did she mean by things you need to know? And why had she written this? Was she expecting something to happen to her? When did you find this? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emilia sighed, her expression heavy with guilt. A few days after I arrived, I was going through her things, trying to organize everything, and I found it tucked inside an old book. I didn't want to show it to you right away because, well, I thought it might be too much for you to handle. Ethan clenched the paper in his hands, his mind racing. Do you think she knew something was going to happen to her? Amelia hesitated, then nodded slowly. I think she might have. Your mother was always very intuitive. She had a way of sensing things before they happened. But I don't know what she meant by this. I wish I did. Ethan looked down at the letter again, reading it over and over, as if the words might change if he stared at them long enough. We need to figure this out, he said finally. If there's something she wanted me to know, I have to find out what it is. Amelia placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. We'll figure it out together, Ethan. I promise. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The letter played over and over in his mind, each word echoing like a haunting melody. He tossed and turned, the shadows in his room seeming to grow darker and more menacing. Finally, he gave up and sat by the window, staring out at the moonlit garden. That's when he heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was faint but unmistakable. It was coming from the hallway. Ethan's heart pounded as he crept to his door, pressing his ear against the wood. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural whisper. He couldn't make out the words, but the voice sent a chill down his spine. Ethan! The voice hissed, barely audible. Ethan froze. His name. It had said his name. He wanted to call out for Amelia, but his voice caught in his throat. The doorknob began to turn slowly, the metal creaking as it moved. Ethan backed away, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The door opened just a crack, and a sliver of darkness seeped into the room. Ethan, the voice whispered again, closer this time. Ethan's legs gave out, and he collapsed to the floor, his eyes fixed on the door. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. And then he saw it, a pair of glowing eyes staring at him from the darkness. He screamed. The next thing he knew, Amelia was shaking him awake. He was back in bed, drenched in sweat, his heart racing. The room was bathed in the soft glow of dawn, and the shadows were gone. Ethan, what's wrong? Amelia asked, her voice filled with concern. I saw something, Ethan stammered, his voice trembling. In the hallway. There was a voice and eyes. Amelia's face paled, but she quickly masked her fear with a reassuring smile. It was just a nightmare, Ethan. You've been through so much. It's natural to have bad dreams. Ethan shook his head. It wasn't a dream. It felt real. Amelia hesitated, then sat down on the edge of the bed, taking his hand in hers. Listen to me, Ethan. I know this is hard, but you have to trust me. We'll get through this together. Whatever's happening, we'll figure it out. Ethan wanted to believe her, but the memory of those glowing eyes lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Over the next few days, Ethan and Amelia began to piece together the mystery of his mother's letter. They searched through her belongings, looking for anything that might give them a clue. They found old photographs, letters, and journals, but nothing that explained the cryptic message. Then one afternoon, Ethan found something strange. Tucked inside a box of his mother's childhood toys was a small, ornate key. It was tarnished with age, but the intricate design on the handle was still visible, a symbol that looked like a twisted tree. What's this? Ethan asked, holding up the key. Amelia's eyes widened. I've seen that before, she said slowly. Your mother used to wear it on a chain around her neck. She said it was important, but she never told me why. Ethan turned the key over in his hands. His curiosity piqued. Do you think it opens something? Amelia nodded. It must, but I don't know what. Ethan's mind raced. What could his mother have been hiding? And why had she kept it a secret? That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he heard the tapping again. This time it was coming from inside the room. He sat up, his heart pounding, and looked around. The sound was coming from the closet. With trembling hands, he got out of bed and approached the closet door. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. He reached for the handle, his breath catching in his throat, and pulled the door open. Inside, he found nothing but clothes and boxes. But as he reached for a box on the top shelf, his fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. He pulled it down and found an old dusty lockbox. The keyhole matched the key he had found earlier. Ethan's hands shook as he inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked and the lid popped open. Inside, he found a stack of papers, a small photograph, and a strange blackened object that looked like a piece of burnt wood. He picked up the photograph and gasped. It was a picture of his mother, much younger, standing in front of an old crumbling house. Her expression was solemn, almost fearful. Written on the back of the photo were three words: "Don't go back." Ethan stared at the photograph, his mind racing. The house in the picture looked ancient, with broken windows and ivy crawling up its walls. It was the kind of place that seemed to hold secrets, dark, heavy secrets, and his mother had been there. Why? What had happened in that house? "Amelia!" Ethan called, his voice trembling. Amelia rushed into the room, her face filled with concern. "What's wrong?" Ethan handed her the photograph. "Look at this. Do you know where this is?" Amelia studied the picture, her brow furrowing. I I think so. It's an old house on the edge of town. Your mother and I used to play near there when we were kids, but we were never allowed inside. Our parents said it was dangerous." "Why?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amelia hesitated, her eyes darting to the lockbox. "I don't know, but your mother was always curious about it. She used to say she felt drawn to it, like it was calling to her. I thought she was just being dramatic, but maybe there was more to it." Ethan's heart pounded. "We have to go there. If my mother left this for me, it has to mean something." Amelia shook her head. "Ethan, no, it's too dangerous. Your mother's note said, 'Don't go back.' We should respect that. But what if she left something there? What if she's trying to tell me something?" Ethan's voice cracked with desperation. "I have to know, Amelia. I have to." Amelia looked at him for a long moment, her expression torn. Finally, she sighed. "All right, but we'll go together and we'll be careful. If anything feels off, we leave immediately. Promise me." Ethan nodded, relief flooding through him. "I promise." The next morning, Ethan and Amelia set out for the old house. The journey took them through dense woods, the trees growing taller and darker the further they went. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sound was the crunch of their footsteps on the forest floor. As they approached the house, Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. The building was even more ominous in person. Its windows were shattered and the front door hung crookedly on its hinges. The ivy that covered the walls seemed almost alive, twisting and curling like grasping fingers. "This place gives me the creeps," Amelia muttered, wrapping her arms around herself. Ethan didn't respond. He was too focused on the house, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel it, the same pull his mother had described. It was as if the house was calling to him, drawing him in. They stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath their feet. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of mildew was overwhelming. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the furniture was old and broken, as if it hadn't been touched in decades. "Where do we even start?" Amelia asked, her voice echoing in the empty space. Ethan didn't know. He wandered through the rooms, his eyes scanning for anything that might give them a clue. Then in what looked like a study, he found something strange. The floorboards in one corner of the room were loose, as if they had been pried up and put back in place. "Amelia, come here," Ethan called, kneeling down to examine the boards. Together they lifted the floorboards, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. Ethan's hands trembled as he picked it up, the cover worn and cracked with age. "Is that—" Amelia trailed off, her eyes wide. Ethan opened the journal, his breath catching as he saw his mother's handwriting on the first page. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm so sorry, Ethan. There are things I should have told you, but I was too afraid. This house holds a secret, a terrible secret, and now it's up to you to uncover the truth. But be careful. The shadows here are alive, and they will stop at nothing to protect what's hidden." Ethan's heart raced as he flipped through the pages. The journal was filled with entries, each one more chilling than the last. His mother had been coming to this house for years, searching for something. But what? "Ethan, look at this," Amelia said, pointing to a page near the end of the journal. Ethan read the entry, his blood running cold. "I found it, the source of the shadows. It's buried beneath the house, in a chamber hidden deep underground. But I can't destroy it. Not yet. I need more time. If something happens to me, Ethan must finish what I started. He's the only one who can." "What does that mean?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling. What's buried beneath the house? Ethan didn't answer. He was too focused on the last line of the entry. The key is in the locket. Find it, and you'll find the truth. Ethan's mind raced as he reread the last line of the journal entry. The key is in the locket. Find it, and you'll find the truth. He looked up at Amelia, his heart pounding. Do you know what locket she's talking about? He asked. Amelia frowned, thinking for a moment. Your mother used to wear a locket all the time. It was silver with a small tree engraved on it. She said it was a family heirloom, but she never took it off. I haven't seen it since she passed. Ethan's stomach dropped. Do you think it's still at the house? Or maybe at the funeral home? Amelia shook her head. I don't know, but if it's important, we need to find it. They quickly left the old house, the weight of the journal's revelations heavy on their minds. As they walked back through the woods, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The trees seemed to close in around them, and the shadows grew longer, darker. He glanced over his shoulder several times, but there was nothing there, just the eerie stillness of the forest. When they returned home, Amelia immediately began searching through his mother's belongings. Ethan joined her, his hands trembling as he sifted through old jewelry boxes and drawers. Finally, in a small velvet pouch tucked inside a shoebox, they found it. The locket was exactly as Amelia had described, silver with a delicate tree engraved on the front. Ethan held it in his palm, feeling the cool metal against his skin. He opened it carefully, revealing a tiny compartment inside. But instead of a photograph, there was a small folded piece of paper. What is it? Amelia asked, leaning closer. Ethan unfolded the paper, his breath catching as he read the words written in his mother's handwriting. Beneath the old house, in the chamber of shadows, lies the truth. But beware, the shadows will try to stop you. Use the key to unlock the door, but do not let them take it from you. Trust no one, not even those you love. The shadows can wear many faces. Ethan's hand shook as he handed the note to Amelia. What does she mean, trust no one? Does that include you? Amelia's face paled, but she shook her head firmly. Ethan, I would never hurt you. Your mother must have been paranoid, scared of what she found. But we're in this together. I promise Ethan wanted to believe her, but the note had planted a seed of doubt in his mind. He tucked the locket into his pocket, his resolve hardening. We need to go back to the house, tonight. That night, under the cover of darkness, Ethan and Amelia returned to the old house. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the crumbling structure. The air was thick with tension as they stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath their feet. Ethan led the way to the study, where they had found the journal. He knelt down and pried up the loose floorboards again, revealing the hidden compartment. But this time, instead of a journal, they found a small, rusted keyhole set into the stone foundation. This must be it, Ethan whispered, pulling the locket from his pocket. He pressed the tree engraving on the front, and to his surprise, a small key slid out from the side of the locket. It was intricately designed, matching the symbol on the locket itself. Amelia's eyes widened. I never knew it did that. Ethan inserted the key into the keyhole and turned it. There was a loud click, and the stone wall shifted, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Ethan, Amelia said, her voice trembling. Are you sure about this? Ethan hesitated, his heart pounding, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. I have to know the truth. They descended the staircase, the air growing colder with each step. The walls were damp, and the only sound was the echo of their footsteps. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a large circular chamber. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and in the center of the room was a pedestal, on top of which rested a small blackened box. Ethan approached the box cautiously, his breath visible in the cold air. As he got closer, he realized the box was covered in the same symbols as the walls. He reached out to touch it, but Amelia grabbed his arm. Wait, she said, her voice urgent. What if it's dangerous? Ethan pulled away, his determination overriding his fear. I have to know. He opened the box, and a wave of cold air rushed out, extinguishing the flashlight Amelia was holding. The room was plunged into darkness, and Ethan heard a low, guttural growl. He stumbled back, his heart racing as the shadows around them began to move, twisting and forming into shapes that shouldn't exist. "Ethan, we need to go!" Emilia shouted, grabbing his arm. But it was too late. The shadows closed in around them, their glowing eyes piercing the darkness. Ethan clutched the box to his chest, his mind racing. What had his mother discovered? And why had she hidden it here? As as the shadows closed in, Ethan felt a strange warmth emanating from the box. He opened it again, and a blinding light burst forth, driving the shadows back. The symbols on the walls began to glow, and the chamber was filled with a low, resonant hum. Ethan's vision blurred, and he felt himself being pulled into the light. The last thing he heard was Emilia's voice, distant and fading. "Ethan, don't let go!" Ethan's world spun as the light engulfed him. He felt weightless, as if he were floating in a sea of blinding whiteness. The hum grew louder, vibrating through his entire body, and then silence. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in the chamber. He stood in a vast, endless void, the ground beneath his feet a shimmering, mirror-like surface that reflected the stars above. The air was still, and the only sound was the faint echo of his own breathing. "Where am I?" Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. "You're in the in-between," a voice replied. Ethan spun around and saw a figure standing a few feet away. It was his mother. She looked exactly as he remembered her warm smile, her kind eyes, her gentle presence. But there was something different about her. She seemed distant, as if she were made of light. "Mom?" Ethan choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Is it really you?" She nodded, her expression filled with both love and sorrow. "Yes, Ethan, it's me. But I don't have much time. You need to listen carefully." Ethan took a step toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "No, Ethan, you can't come closer. This place, it's not safe for you to stay too long." "What is this place?" Ethan asked, his voice breaking. "What's happening?" His mother sighed, her gaze filled with regret. "The box you found? It's a relic of an ancient power, a power that has been hidden for centuries. The shadows you've seen, the whispers, the tapping, they're all connected to it. The shadows are guardians, but they've been corrupted. They've become dangerous." Ethan's mind raced. "But why did you hide it? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to protect you," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I could destroy it, but I couldn't. The power it holds is too great, and now it's up to you to decide what to do with it." Ethan shook his head, overwhelmed. "I don't understand. What am I supposed to do?" His mother's form began to flicker, the light around her dimming. "You have to choose, Ethan. You can destroy the box and end the power forever, but it will come at a cost. Or you can take the power for yourself, but it will change you. It will change everything." "What cost?" Ethan asked, his heart pounding. "What do you mean?" Her voice grew faint, her form fading into the light. "The cost is your memories, Ethan. If you destroy the box, you'll forget everything. Me, your father, your life. But if you take the power, you'll carry the burden of the shadows forever." "No!" Ethan cried, reaching out for her. "I can't lose you again." "I'm already gone, Ethan," she said softly. "But you're still here. You have to be strong. Choose wisely." And then she was gone. Ethan woke with a start, gasping for air. He was back in the chamber, the box still clutched in his hands. Emilia was kneeling beside him, her face pale with fear. "Ethan, are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaking. He nodded, his mind reeling from what he had just experienced. I saw her. My mom. She told me what the box is, what it does." Emilia's eyes widened. "What did she say?" Ethan hesitated, the weight of his mother's words pressing down on him. "She said I have to choose. I can destroy the box, but it will cost me my memories. Or I can take the power, but it will change me." Emilia stared at him, her expression unreadable. "What are you going to do?" Ethan looked down at the box, his hands trembling. He thought about his mother, his father, everything he had lost. He thought about the shadows, the whispers, the fear, and then he thought about Emilia, the only family he had left. "I don't know," he whispered. I don't know what to do. The chamber was silent, the air thick with tension. Ethan sat on the cold stone floor, the box resting in his lap. Emilia knelt beside him, her eyes filled with worry. The shadows around them seemed to hold their breath, waiting for his decision. Ethan's mind raced as he weighed his options. Destroying the box would mean losing everything, his memories, his past, the people he loved. But taking the power, what would that mean? Would he become like the shadows, twisted and corrupted? Would he lose himself? Ethan, Emilia said softly, breaking the silence. Whatever you choose, I'll be here for you. But you need to decide soon. The shadows, they're getting closer. Ethan looked up and saw that she was right. The shadows were creeping toward them, their glowing eyes fixed on the box. The hum in the chamber grew louder, more urgent, as if the relic itself was urging him to make a choice. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He thought about his mother's words, her final plea for him to be strong. He thought about the life he had lived, the love he had known, and the pain he had endured. And then he thought about the future. What kind of person he wanted to be. What kind of world he wanted to live in. I can't lose you, he whispered, opening his eyes and looking at Emilia. You're all I have left. Emilia's eyes filled with tears. Ethan, but I can't let the shadows win, he continued, his voice growing stronger. I can't let this power destroy anyone else. He stood up, clutching the box tightly. The shadows hissed and recoiled, their forms writhing in agitation. The hum in the chamber reached a deafening pitch, and the symbols on the walls began to glow brighter. Ethan, what are you doing? Emilia asked, her voice trembling. I'm ending this, he said firmly. For my mom. For you. For everyone. He raised the box above his head and brought it down with all his strength, smashing it against the stone pedestal. The box shattered, and a blinding light erupted from it, filling the chamber. The shadows screamed, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The hum grew louder and louder until it was a deafening roar. And then, silence. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was lying on the floor of the chamber. The box was gone, reduced to a pile of dust. The symbols on the walls had faded, and the shadows were nowhere to be seen. The air was still, and the only sound was Emilia's soft breathing beside him. Ethan, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He sat up slowly, his head pounding. I'm here. Emilia reached out and took his hand, her grip tight. What happened? Are you okay? Ethan looked at her, his mind foggy. I think so. The box is gone. The shadows are gone. Emilia's eyes filled with relief, but then she hesitated. Ethan, do you remember me? He frowned, his heart skipping a beat. Of course I remember you. You're Emilia. You're my... He trailed off, his brow furrowing. You're my... aunt? Emilia's face fell, and she nodded slowly. Yes, Ethan. I'm your aunt. Ethan's chest tightened as he realized what had happened. He remembered Emilia, but the memories were distant, like fragments of a dream. He remembered his mother, but her face was blurry, her voice faint. He remembered his father, but only as a shadowy figure, a name without a face. I remember, he said, his voice breaking. But it's fading. It's all fading. Emilia pulled him into a tight hug, her tears soaking into his shirt. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I'm so sorry. Ethan clung to her, his own tears falling. He had made his choice, and he knew it was the right one. But the cost was more painful than he had imagined. As they left the chamber and made their way back to the surface, Ethan felt a strange sense of peace. The weight of the shadows was gone, and the air felt lighter, cleaner. But the emptiness inside him was overwhelming, a void where his memories used to be. When they reached the old house, Ethan paused and looked back at the crumbling structure. He didn't remember why they had come here, but he knew it was important. He knew he had done something brave, something selfless. Ethan, Emilia said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. Let's go home. He nodded, turning away from the house. As they walked through the woods, the first light of dawn broke through the trees, casting a golden glow over the forest. Ethan took a deep breath, the cool morning air filling his lungs. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he was not alone. Emilia was with him, and together they would find a way to move forward. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.